Palace audio leaked, a royal guard's voice, a royal name, and a chilling pause best royal tale. The golden chandeliers reflected softly on the polished marble floors, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly down the halls. Thomas, a young royal guard, walked steadily, his polished boots echoing softly. He had worked at the palace for several years and knew these halls like the back of his hand. Every crack in the floor, every creaking door, and every shadow was familiar to him. Yet tonight, there was an unusual stillness that made him uneasy. He had been assigned to the West Wing, one of the oldest parts of the palace. Its walls were lined with portraits of monarchs from centuries past, all staring solemnly with eyes that seemed almost alive in the dim light. Thomas always felt a strange connection to these paintings. They reminded him of the weight of history he carried every day, of the legacy he was tasked with protecting. He had joined the royal guard not for fame or money, but out of a deep respect for the monarchy and a desire to serve. Tonight, like many nights before, Thomas carried his radio to stay in contact with the control room. The small device was a lifeline, allowing him to report anything unusual. He walked slowly, listening carefully for any sound that might suggest something out of place. The palace was enormous, and even a small incident could go unnoticed for hours if not reported promptly. Thomas prided himself on being alert. He had learned from experience that even a single moment of carelessness could lead to serious trouble. As he rounded a corner near the royal library, he heard a soft voice coming from the security office. It was another guard, Mark, speaking quietly into his radio. Thomas paused, listening. Mark was discussing routine matters, mentioning shift changes and minor maintenance issues. Thomas relaxed slightly, reassured that everything seemed normal. Yet just as he was about to continue his patrol, he noticed something unusual on his radio's display, a small red light blinking rapidly. Thomas frowned and picked up the device. "Control, this is Thomas." "What's causing the alert?" he asked, his voice calm but steady. There was a brief pause before the voice on the other end replied. "Stand by, Thomas, we are checking." He waited, feeling a strange tension in the air. It was not fear exactly, but an anticipation that something unexpected was about to happen. Thomas had experienced many nights like this, but there was always a certain unpredictability in the palace. The older guards often said the building had a life of its own, and sometimes it felt true. The sound of his own footsteps on the marble, echoing down the long corridors, seemed louder tonight. He shook his head to clear the thought. He was a trained guard, not someone to be spooked by imagination. Thomas continued his patrol, keeping his eyes open for anything unusual. He passed the grand dining hall, where silverware shone faintly in the moonlight streaming through the tall windows. The hall was silent, the echo of his steps the only sound. He thought about the family he protected, not just the current generation of royals, but the history of generations before them. Each room, each hallway, held memories, secrets, and stories that few outsiders could ever imagine. As he walked, Thomas's mind wandered to his own life. He had grown up in a small town far from the palace, dreaming of one day serving in a place where history and tradition were alive. His parents had been cautious when he first applied, warning him of the discipline and responsibility required. But Thomas had insisted. He wanted to be part of something larger than himself, something that demanded loyalty and courage. That dedication had carried him through the rigorous training, long hours, and strict rules of the royal guard. And now, walking these corridors at night, he felt the weight of that responsibility more than ever. Then, almost suddenly, he remembered a conversation he had had earlier that day. It was with Mark, who had jokingly mentioned how easy it would be for someone to record a private conversation without realizing it. Thomas had laughed at the time, but now, holding his radio and noticing the blinking red light, he felt a shiver run down his spine. The thought was fleeting, but enough to make him more cautious. As he approached the West Wing lounge, Thomas noticed that one of the doors was slightly ajar. He frowned. That room was supposed to be locked at all times unless authorized personnel were inside. He approached carefully, hand resting on the sidearm at his hip. Not that he expected trouble, but protocol demanded caution. Pushing the door open slightly, he peeked inside. The room was empty, but the faint glow of a security monitor cast strange shadows on the walls. Thomas entered slowly, checking each corner. Everything seemed normal, yet his instincts told him to be vigilant. He looked at the monitor and saw the cameras from nearby halls. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then, as he adjusted the angle of the camera, he noticed a subtle change in the audio feed. A faint conversation could be heard, one that was not part of normal patrol chatter. Thomas leaned closer, listening carefully. It was Mark, talking softly into his radio. He mentioned something about a royal family member, naming them directly, and then paused. The pause was long enough to feel almost deliberate, though Thomas knew it was probably just Mark thinking. But combined with the earlier red alert, the moment felt charged with tension. Thomas felt a knot in his stomach. He was hearing something private, something that was never meant to be public. For a moment, Thomas froze. He knew that even overhearing a conversation like this could be dangerous. Sharing it, even accidentally, could have consequences he could not imagine. Yet, at the same time, he was curious. Human nature made it difficult to ignore such moments. He leaned slightly closer to listen, trying to catch every word without interrupting. The conversation ended and the radio went silent. Thomas straightened up, trying to shake off the unease. He reminded himself that he had a duty to protect, not to speculate. The red light on his own device was still blinking, but the source of the alert seemed to have resolved. He made a quick note in his mental log and resumed his patrol. Yet, even as he walked down the long corridor, the sound of Mark's voice and that long, chilling pause lingered in his mind. He passed the portrait of a long-dead monarch and glanced up at the painted eyes. They seemed to watch him, as if aware of the secret he had just heard. Thomas shook his head, trying to focus on his duties. There would be time later to think about the incident. For now, he had to stay alert, continue his rounds, and ensure the safety of the palace. As the night deepened, Thomas moved from corridor to corridor, checking doors, windows, and security systems. Everything was as it should be, yet the memory of the conversation stayed with him. It was a small thing, just a few words and a pause, but it carried weight. In the palace, even small things could grow into events that attracted attention, speculation, and sometimes scandal. By the time Thomas returned to the main security office for his scheduled check-in, he felt exhausted but alert. The palace was silent, the only sound the distant ticking of a grand clock somewhere in the tower. He reported his patrol as usual, noting nothing unusual, but he could not erase the memory of the audio from his mind. Later, when he finally sat down for a short break, he thought about the power of words. A simple conversation, a single pause could change everything. He did not know it yet, but this night, this small incident would soon ripple far beyond the walls of the palace. It would become something far larger than he could imagine. And in the quiet of the West Wing, surrounded by centuries of history, Thomas felt the first stirrings of a story that would be heard around the world. The next morning, the palace was bathed in soft sunlight, its golden walls and towering spires glowing warmly. Thomas arrived for his day shift, trying to shake off the tension from the previous night. Despite the calm, there was an invisible weight pressing on him. The memory of Mark's words and that long, chilling pause lingered in his mind, making it hard to focus. He moved through the familiar corridors, nodding politely to other guards and staff, but his thoughts were elsewhere. By mid-morning, Thomas began to notice subtle changes. The normally cheerful staff seemed quieter than usual. Whispers floated through the hallways, eyes occasionally darting toward him with a mix of curiosity and concern. Even though nothing had been officially announced, it felt as if something was already spreading through the palace. Thomas tried to remind himself that it was just his imagination. Yet, the sense of being watched, of being part of something larger than himself, was undeniable. He reached the security office and found a small crowd gathered around the monitors. The senior guard, Mr. Hawthorne, a stern man with decades of experience, was speaking quietly but urgently into a phone. Thomas could hear only fragments of the conversation. Words like leak, audio, and investigation stood out. His heart began to race. Could it be that the conversation from last night had somehow been recorded and leaked? Thomas felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The idea seemed impossible, yet the evidence was there. The red light on his radio, the lingering memory of Mark's voice. He tried to calm himself, taking a deep breath. "Maybe it's nothing," he whispered to himself, but even as he said it, he knew it was unlikely. The palace was under constant surveillance, and every word spoken within its walls carried weight. A simple mistake could become a story that reached far beyond these halls. By late morning, Thomas had learned the truth. A small, unofficial audio clip had somehow been leaked online. It contained the very conversation he had overheard the previous night, including Mark's voice, the royal family member's name, and that long, tense pause. The clip had spread rapidly, shared across social media platforms and discussed in online forums. What had been a quiet night in the West Wing had now become a public spectacle. Thomas felt a mix of disbelief and fear. He had never imagined that such a small, seemingly private moment could reach so many people. The palace staff were in a state of controlled panic, trying to manage the situation without alerting the royal family prematurely. Thomas's mind raced with questions. How had the audio been recorded? Who had access to it? And most importantly, what would happen to him? He remembered the lessons from his training. In times of crisis, a guard's first duty was to remain calm and professional. Panic could make even the most loyal employee seem careless or untrustworthy. Thomas squared his shoulders and focused on his responsibilities. He would continue to patrol, to monitor the palace, and to do his job as best he could. The rest, he told himself, was out of his hands. As the hours passed, the palace became a hub of activity. Journalists and photographers had not yet arrived at the gates, but the buzz was unmistakable. Staff whispered about how quickly the audio had traveled, speculating about who had shared it and what the implications might be. Thomas moved among his colleagues, trying to appear composed, but every glance, every hurried step, reminded him that he was now part of a story much larger than himself. In the afternoon, Thomas was called into a small meeting with Mr. Hawthorne and two other senior officers. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. The officers explained that the palace had initiated a full investigation into the leak. Cameras, radios, and communication devices would be reviewed. Every guard's actions would be examined, not to assign blame immediately, but to understand how such a leak could have occurred. Thomas felt a wave of anxiety, but he reminded himself of the truth. He had done nothing intentionally wrong. He had simply been performing his duties when the conversation happened. He explained this calmly to the officers, recounting exactly what he had heard and where he had been. His honesty seemed to reassure them, though he could still see the seriousness in their eyes. In a place like the palace, even unintentional mistakes could carry serious consequences. Despite the investigation, Thomas tried to return to routine duties. He patrolled the corridors, checked doors, and monitored cameras, all while keeping one eye on the growing situation. The palace, usually a place of strict order and quiet efficiency, now felt fragile, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Thomas's mind often drifted back to that pause in the audio, wondering why it had felt so significant. Perhaps it was nothing, he told himself, but the pause had captured the public imagination in ways he could not yet understand. By evening, the palace's PR team released a carefully worded statement. It did not mention the royal family member by name, nor did it discuss the content of the audio in detail. Instead, it focused on privacy, security, and the palace's commitment to maintaining confidentiality. The statement was short, precise, and aimed at calming the growing speculation. Thomas read it carefully, noting how much effort had been made to protect both the staff and the family. He felt a small measure of relief, knowing that the palace leadership was handling the matter professionally. Yet, despite the official reassurances, the atmosphere inside the palace remained tense. Staff members whispered in hallways, reporters speculated on social media, and Thomas could not escape the feeling that the event had changed something fundamental. The palace, which had always felt like a place of timeless order, now seemed vulnerable, like a delicate clockwork mechanism that could be disrupted by the smallest misstep. Thomas spent a long night reflecting on the day's events. He thought about the power of technology, of how quickly information could spread. He realized that even a moment's carelessness, or even unintentional circumstance, could reach thousands, if not millions, in a matter of hours. The world outside the palace walls seemed closer, more connected, and at the same time more dangerous in ways he had never imagined. As he lay in his modest quarters within the palace, Thomas felt a mix of emotions. He was proud to serve, yet humbled by the responsibility he carried. He was anxious about the investigation, yet reassured by the integrity of the palace leadership. Most of all, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him, a reminder that even small moments could echo far beyond the walls he had sworn to protect. By morning, Thomas knew that life inside the palace would never be the same. The leaked audio had introduced a new awareness among the staff, a caution that would linger for months, perhaps years. Every conversation, every step, every decision would now be measured not only for its immediate effect, but also for its potential to reach the outside world. The palace had always been a symbol of continuity, but now it felt a little more fragile, a little more human. Thomas resumed his duties with renewed focus. Every corridor he walked, every camera he monitored, every door he checked carried a heightened sense of purpose. He understood that his role was no longer just about security. It was also about maintaining trust, upholding responsibility, and navigating the delicate balance between service and privacy. And though the world outside had caught a fleeting glimpse of palace life, Thomas knew that the truth of what happened, the intentions, the loyalty, the small human errors, would remain far more complex than anyone could guess. The audio clip was only a fragment, a moment frozen in time, yet it had set in motion a chain of events that would test the resilience, discretion, and courage of everyone within those grand, ancient walls. For Thomas, the experience marked a turning point. He realized that serving in the palace was not only about duty and honor, but also about navigating unforeseen challenges with calm, integrity, and awareness. The leaked audio had shaken the foundations, but it also revealed the depth of commitment required to protect the palace and the people within it. And as he walked the quiet corridors that night, Thomas understood that his role and the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. The following days brought a strange rhythm to the palace, one that was neither fully calm nor entirely tense. Thomas tried to focus on his duties, patrolling corridors, checking cameras, and monitoring doors as usual. Yet, the leak had left an invisible mark on everything he did. Each step felt heavier, each sound seemed sharper, and every glance from his colleagues carried unspoken questions. Thomas could feel the curiosity in their eyes, the subtle mix of concern and speculation. Even though no one directly accused him, he could sense that his presence now held a shadow of doubt, and that alone made him uneasy. At first, Thomas tried to convince himself that he was imagining it. After all, he had done nothing wrong. The conversation he had overheard had not been his fault, and he had followed every protocol correctly. Yet, human nature has a way of questioning even the most obvious truths. Every time he walked past Mark, he caught himself analyzing the younger guard's expressions, wondering if he, too, suspected Thomas of being connected to the leak. Even the senior officers, normally calm and measured, seemed to look at him with a hint of scrutiny. During a routine check in the East Wing, Thomas paused outside one of the private chambers. The heavy door, polished and ornate, represented a world he would never fully enter. Beyond it were secrets he could never speak of, moments of vulnerability for people he had sworn to protect. That thought had never weighed on him so heavily before. Until now, the palace had always felt like a place of order, a place where rules and procedures provided safety and certainty. But now, with the leak circulating, Thomas realized that even the smallest misstep, or even the smallest accident, could ripple outward, changing perceptions and trust in ways he could not control. That evening he found a quiet spot near the palace gardens, where the moonlight reflected softly on the fountain. Thomas leaned against the stone railing, letting his thoughts drift. He reflected on his life, on the choices that had brought him here. He had left a small town far from the city, leaving family and friends behind to serve in a place that demanded loyalty above all else. His parents had been proud, of course, but they had also worried constantly, warning him that the palace required more than just courage. It required constant vigilance, discretion, and the ability to endure scrutiny without complaint. Thomas now understood those warnings in a way he had never truly grasped before. As he stared into the fountain's still water, Thomas thought about the broader consequences of the leak. The palace, which had always seemed untouchable, was suddenly vulnerable. A few seconds of audio had sparked curiosity across the world. Ordinary people had caught a glimpse of a world meant to remain private, a world Thomas had sworn to protect. He felt a deep responsibility, not just for the palace, but for the people within it. Every family member, every staff member, every colleague depended on the integrity of the guards to keep that trust intact. And now, he wondered whether one small incident could permanently damage that trust. Thomas's thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice behind him. It was Mark, the young guard whose conversation had inadvertently started the chain of events. He approached hesitantly, careful not to startle Thomas. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Thomas nodded and Mark took a seat beside him. For a few minutes, neither spoke. The garden was quiet, the fountain's gentle splash the only sound. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he said quietly. "I never thought that conversation could go beyond the radio." Thomas listened, his expression calm, though his mind was racing. He knew that Mark's words were sincere. The younger guard was overwhelmed, caught between guilt and fear, much like Thomas himself. "I know," Thomas replied finally. "None of this was intentional, but sometimes even small things can have big consequences. That's the reality of working here." He paused, looking out at the gardens. "It's not just about mistakes. It's about how we respond to them and how we maintain trust when things go wrong." Mark nodded, absorbing the words. He looked down at the stone floor, wringing his hands nervously. "I feel like I've ruined everything," he admitted. "The palace, our jobs, I don't even know if we can fix it." Thomas placed a hand on his shoulder. "We can't change what happened," he said gently. "But we can choose how we act now. We can stay true to our duty and prove through our actions that we are loyal and responsible." That night, Thomas returned to his quarters feeling a strange mixture of relief and burden. He knew that guiding Mark, helping him remain calm and professional, was part of his duty, but the pressure weighed on him, pressing into his chest like a stone. He thought about the investigation that had begun and the endless discussions that would follow. The palace might not see the leak as a disaster yet, but Thomas knew that the ripple effects could last for months, perhaps even years. Over the next few days, Thomas noticed subtle changes in his routines. The senior officers scheduled additional briefings, and communication protocols were reinforced. Every message, every radio transmission, and every patrol was scrutinized more closely than ever before. Thomas adapted quickly, performing his duties with precision while remaining vigilant about potential mistakes. Every time he walked past the Hall of Portraits, he felt the weight of the palace's history pressing on him, reminding him that he was now part of an ongoing story. Yet despite the structured routines, Thomas struggled internally. He spent long hours reflecting on the concept of trust. The palace had trusted him to protect its secrets, and he had done so faithfully. But the leak had shown how easily perception could shift, how quickly trust could be questioned even without fault. It was a lesson in responsibility, in the fragility of reputation, and in the human tendency to judge without knowing all the facts. One evening, as he patrolled the corridors alone, Thomas thought about the world outside the palace. People were curious, eager for any detail they could find. Social media, news articles, and online forums had transformed a private incident into a global spectacle. Thomas wondered what it must feel like for the royal family to have their lives dissected in this way. He realized that his own anxiety was only a small reflection of the pressure they must feel constantly. His role, though small in comparison, mattered because it protected not just information, but the dignity of the family and the integrity of the palace itself. Despite the stress, Thomas found moments of clarity. He began to understand that his duty was not merely about performing tasks, but about managing responsibility with wisdom and patience. He took extra care with every action, reviewing protocols, ensuring cameras were aligned, and confirming that doors were properly secured. Every small task became a testament to his dedication, a way to reaffirm trust through deliberate, careful behavior. As the investigation continued, Thomas also began to reflect on the personal cost of service. He missed home, his family, and the simplicity of a life without constant scrutiny. He realized that loyalty to the palace sometimes meant sacrificing personal comfort, freedom, and even peace of mind. Yet he also recognized the honor in his work, the rare privilege of serving in a place steeped in history and tradition. The balance between duty and personal life became clearer to him, even as the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. One quiet night, Thomas again found himself near the fountain in the gardens. The moonlight painted silver patterns on the water, and the palace seemed calm, almost serene. He thought about the leak, about Mark, and about the countless small choices that could either protect or endanger the trust placed in him. He understood that the pause in the audio, the seemingly insignificant moment, had become a symbol, not just of curiosity or gossip, but of human vulnerability, of the delicate line between duty and error. In that stillness, Thomas made a silent promise to himself. He would continue to serve with honesty, integrity, and vigilance. He would guide Mark and support his colleagues, ensuring that they too understood the importance of responsibility. Most importantly, he would protect the palace, its secrets, and its people, no matter the personal cost. The experience had tested him, challenged him, and even frightened him, but it had also strengthened his resolve. As dawn approached, Thomas walked slowly back to his quarters, feeling a strange sense of calm. The palace, with all its history, grandeur, and complexity, had taught him a powerful lesson. Mistakes happen, but true character is revealed in how one responds. The leak had been a test, an unforeseen challenge that required courage, patience, and reflection. And Thomas now understood that serving the palace was not just about following rules. It was about embodying trust, protecting the vulnerable, and maintaining dignity in a world that constantly watched. That morning, As he prepared for another day, Thomas felt a quiet pride. The palace was still standing, its secrets still protected, and his duties still intact. The incident had shaken the routine, but it had also revealed the depth of his commitment. He had learned that loyalty was more than obedience. It was awareness, care, and the courage to face both mistakes and consequences with integrity. And in that realization, Thomas found a strength he had not known he possessed, a confidence that would guide him through the days to come. The palace felt different that week. The usual calm and routine had been replaced by a quiet tension that lingered in every hallway. Guards moved with careful precision, staff spoke in hushed tones, and even the most ordinary duties carried a heightened sense of responsibility. Thomas noticed the subtle changes immediately. The investigation into the audio leak had intensified, and every step he took, every action he performed, felt scrutinized, as if the walls themselves were watching. From the moment Thomas arrived for his shift, he could sense that the senior officers were closely monitoring not only him but all the guards. Mr. Hawthorne, the senior officer, held briefings multiple times a day, reviewing every detail of the incident. "We need to know how this happened," he told the team, his voice steady but firm. "We must ensure that the palace remains secure and that no further breaches occur." Every guard nodded in agreement, but Thomas could feel the unspoken tension pressing on him like a weight he could not set down. Thomas tried to focus on his duties. He patrolled the corridors, checked security systems, and monitored the cameras with meticulous attention. Every door he opened, every step he took, and every conversation he overheard felt more important than ever before. He double-checked locks and verified that communication lines were functioning properly. Even small gestures, like confirming that cameras were correctly angled or that gates were secured, carried more significance in this heightened atmosphere. Despite his efforts, Thomas could not escape the feeling of unease. He knew the leak had been unintentional, yet the consequences were real and unavoidable. The audio had reached the public, and although it did not reveal anything damaging, it had sparked speculation, curiosity, and concern. Social media discussions, news reports, and online forums dissected every second of the clip. People speculated about the identity of the royal mentioned, about the significance of the pause, and about the internal workings of the palace. Even though the palace remained officially silent on details, the world outside was buzzing with conjecture. The investigation itself was thorough. Every guard's actions were examined, every camera feed reviewed, and every communication recorded over the previous days analyzed. Thomas cooperated fully, recounting his actions and movements in precise detail. He described the moment he had heard the conversation, the location of the monitors, and his own patrol route. His honesty seemed to reassure the investigators, though he could sense that the process was far from over. During one meeting, Thomas learned that the forensic team had traced the source of the leak. It was confirmed that the audio had not been intentionally shared by any guard. The technical investigation revealed that a malfunction in a communication system had caused the conversation to be transmitted outside the secure network. It was an accident, a mistake of technology, not of loyalty or ethics. Hearing this, Thomas felt a wave of relief. He had been terrified that his life, career, and reputation might have been destroyed by something he did not control. Now, at least, he knew that the blame was not his. Even with the revelation, the palace maintained a careful and cautious approach. Senior officers reminded all staff of the importance of vigilance, of checking devices, and of following protocols precisely. Thomas found that every task he performed now carried additional meaning. It was no longer enough to simply do the job. He had to demonstrate careful awareness, attention to detail, and responsibility in every action. Each patrol, each check, and each report was a way of restoring trust, not only with the palace but also with himself. The royal family remained largely shielded from the incident. Thomas knew that the members of the family were aware that something had occurred, yet they had chosen to leave the investigation in the hands of the senior staff. That decision, while understandable, added another layer of responsibility to Thomas's role. Protecting the family was no longer just about security. It was about ensuring that no further leaks, intentional or accidental, could compromise their privacy. As the days passed, the palace slowly began to stabilize. The public curiosity remained, but the initial frenzy had subsided. The statement issued by the palace had reassured many that the situation was under control. Journalists reported on the event with cautious speculation, emphasizing that no wrongdoing had been found among the guards. Social media discussions continued, but the intensity had softened. Thomas noticed that his colleagues were also adjusting. The initial panic and tension gradually gave way to a renewed focus on duty and responsibility. Despite the reassurance, Thomas could not ignore the emotional impact the situation had had on him. He reflected on the fragility of reputation, the power of perception, and the importance of careful, deliberate action. He realized that even an unintentional event could lead to scrutiny, speculation, and misunderstanding. The experience had taught him that loyalty and integrity were not only about following rules, but also about maintaining composure, honesty, and awareness in challenging situations. Thomas also thought about Mark, who had been understandably shaken by the leak. He continued to mentor the younger guard, reminding him that the incident had been a technical accident, not a personal failing. Together, they reviewed protocols, practiced communication procedures, and discussed ways to prevent similar situations in the future. Thomas recognized that part of his responsibility was to support his colleagues, helping them navigate the pressures of serving in a high-profile environment. One afternoon, Thomas was asked to attend a private briefing with Mr. Hawthorne and another senior officer. They thanked him for his honesty, professionalism, and dedication during the investigation. "You have handled this situation with integrity," Mr. Hawthorne said. "Your actions have helped maintain the trust of the palace and the family." That is no small accomplishment. Thomas felt a quiet pride. The words reassured him that his commitment and careful attention had been noticed, even if the situation had been stressful and frightening. The investigation also led to improvements in the palace's communication systems. Technical staff worked to enhance security, prevent accidental leaks, and ensure that sensitive conversations could never be transmitted outside the secure network. Thomas participated in training sessions and briefings, learning about the changes and understanding the role he would play in implementing them. These adjustments reinforced the importance of vigilance and the responsibility of every staff member to maintain the integrity of the palace. As the weeks went by, Thomas began to notice a gradual return to normalcy. The corridors were quieter, the staff more relaxed, and the sense of unease slowly lifting. Yet the lessons of the leak remained. Every guard was more attentive, every staff member more cautious, and every action carried the awareness that even a small mistake could have significant consequences. Thomas had learned to navigate the delicate balance between duty and caution, between loyalty and responsibility. Through it all, Thomas reflected on the nature of trust and accountability. The leak had been unintentional, yet it had tested the palace, the staff, and even himself. He realized that loyalty was not only about preventing mistakes, but also about responding effectively when accidents occur. It was about maintaining composure, demonstrating integrity, and supporting colleagues and superiors during times of uncertainty. By the end of the investigation, Thomas felt a sense of closure. The technical cause of the leak had been identified, protocols had been improved, and trust had been restored. He had faced the challenge with honesty, patience, and professionalism, proving both to himself and to the palace that he could handle adversity responsibly. The experience had been difficult, yet it had strengthened his confidence and reaffirmed his commitment to duty. In the quiet moments, Thomas sometimes returned to the garden fountain, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. The palace, with all its history, grandeur, and complexity, had faced a test, and the staff had risen to meet it. Thomas understood that the experience had not only tested procedures and technology, but had also revealed the human element, the need for courage, judgment, and steadfastness in the face of unexpected challenges. As he walked the corridors, Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just a guard performing routine duties. He was a protector of trust, a steward of history, and a guardian of responsibility. The leak had reminded him that his role was not just about security, but also about integrity, vigilance, and the careful exercise of judgment. Each action he took, each decision he made, was now infused with the awareness of the broader impact on the palace and the people within it. By the time the palace returned to its usual rhythm, Thomas had grown in ways he had not anticipated. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and pressure, yet had emerged with a deeper understanding of duty, responsibility, and trust. The incident had tested him, shaped him, and ultimately strengthened his resolve. And as he stood once more in the corridors he had walked countless times before, Thomas felt a quiet pride in knowing that he had met the challenge with honor, integrity, and calm determination. The weeks after the investigation brought a sense of calm back to the palace. The initial storm had passed, leaving the staff to resume their routines with a mixture of relief and renewed focus. For Thomas, the experience had left a lasting impression. He walked the corridors as he always had, but now each step carried more awareness, each glance more attention to detail. The palace no longer felt simply like a place to do his job. It felt like a living reminder of the responsibilities he had chosen to accept. Thomas spent his mornings on routine patrols, moving through halls lined with centuries of history. The portraits of long-dead monarchs seemed almost comforting now, as if the presence of history itself lent him strength. Every door he checked, every camera he monitored, felt like a small but important act of trust. He knew that the palace's reputation rested not only on its grandeur, but also on the dedication of its staff. Each day, he tried to embody that trust in every action. Even with the calm restored, Thomas could not completely ignore the public interest in the leaked audio. Social media posts still discussed the clip, though the intensity had diminished. Most people seemed satisfied that the incident had been a technical mistake, but curiosity lingered. Thomas sometimes thought about the world outside, the millions of eyes that had glimpsed a fragment of palace life. It reminded him of the delicate balance between transparency and privacy, and of the responsibility that came with being a guardian of both. Thomas also thought about his colleagues, particularly Mark, who had struggled after the leak. He made a point to check in regularly, offering guidance and support. Together, they reviewed protocols, practiced communication procedures, and shared experiences from their shifts. Thomas realized that leadership was not just about giving orders but about mentoring and inspiring others, especially during moments of uncertainty. Helping Mark regain confidence was a small victory, but it reinforced the importance of teamwork, patience, and empathy. The palace itself seemed to breathe with a renewed sense of order. Maintenance teams inspected security systems, technical staff ensured that communication networks were secure, and every guard approached their duties with a quiet vigilance. Thomas noticed the subtle ways the staff had adapted. Everyone seemed more attentive, more aware of the importance of their actions. Even the smallest tasks, like securing a door or adjusting a camera, now carried a sense of meaning beyond routine. The palace was more than bricks and marble. It was the culmination of careful, dedicated effort, and Thomas understood that he was an essential part of that effort. During his quiet moments, Thomas reflected on the lessons he had learned. He thought about responsibility, trust, and the impact of seemingly small events. The leak had been unintentional, yet it had tested not only technology but also human judgment, patience, and composure. He realized that true loyalty was more than obedience. It was awareness, integrity, and the courage to face unexpected challenges with calm and honesty. The experience had revealed the importance of perspective, understanding that mistakes do not define a person, but how one responds to them does. One evening, Thomas walked through the gardens, the same place where he had spent long nights reflecting during the height of the crisis. The fountain sparkled in the moonlight, casting soft shadows across the paths. He thought about the past few weeks and how much had changed. The palace had faced a moment of vulnerability, and the staff had risen to meet it. He felt a quiet pride in being part of that response, knowing that his actions, though small, had contributed to preserving trust and integrity. Thomas also considered the broader meaning of his role. He had joined the palace as a young guard, seeking purpose and a connection to something larger than himself. The leak had reminded him that service was not just about performing tasks, it was about embodying principles. Each day presented choices, small and large, that shaped the perception of the palace and the trust placed in its staff. Thomas understood that the responsibility was ongoing, not something that ended with the investigation. Every decision mattered, and every action had consequences, however subtle they might seem. As he walked back to the corridors, Thomas reflected on the balance between duty and personal life. The palace required vigilance, patience, and dedication, but it also demanded careful management of one's own emotions and well-being. He had learned to navigate fear, uncertainty, and public scrutiny with a level of composure he had not known before. He understood that personal growth often came from challenges, and that moments of difficulty could strengthen character if approached thoughtfully. Thomas found satisfaction in the daily routines that had once seemed mundane. Checking security systems, patrolling corridors, and monitoring communications were no longer just obligations. They were acts of responsibility and service. He noticed that even small successes, like identifying a minor technical issue or assisting a colleague, brought a sense of accomplishment. The palace's well-being depended on the collective effort of all its staff, and Thomas understood that he was part of a larger story that extended far beyond himself. Over time, Thomas also developed a deeper appreciation for the human side of the palace. He saw the dedication, care, and professionalism of everyone around him. The kitchen staff, cleaners, administrative personnel, and guards all played vital roles in maintaining the palace's function and reputation. He realized that serving in such an environment required not only discipline, but also empathy and collaboration. Trust and respect were earned through consistent, thoughtful action, and he made a conscious effort to uphold both in his interactions. The royal family, though largely removed from the day-to-day details, acknowledged the professionalism of the staff. Thomas felt a quiet sense of validation knowing that the family trusted the palace team to manage difficult situations responsibly. The acknowledgement was subtle, often communicated through small gestures or words of appreciation from senior officers, but it carried significant weight. Thomas understood that recognition was not the goal. Maintaining integrity, protecting privacy, and performing duties diligently were what mattered most. In the quiet moments before nightfall, Thomas would sometimes sit by the fountain, letting his thoughts drift. He reflected on the journey he had taken, from a young, eager guard seeking purpose to someone who had faced uncertainty, pressure, and scrutiny with resilience. The leak had been a challenge, but it had also been a teacher. It had shown him the fragility of trust, the importance of vigilance, and the value of integrity. Most importantly, It had reminded him that every action, no matter how small, could have an impact far beyond what he could immediately see. Thomas also thought about the future. He knew that challenges would continue to arise in the palace, that technology would evolve, and that human error could never be completely eliminated. But he felt ready. The experience had strengthened his judgment, patience, and confidence. He understood that serving in the palace was a lifelong commitment, requiring constant awareness and dedication. Each day would bring new situations, and each moment demanded careful thought, integrity, and calm action. By the time the next morning arrived, Thomas had embraced a sense of quiet purpose. The palace was no longer simply a workplace. It was a place of learning, growth, and responsibility. He understood that his role extended beyond routine duties. It encompassed protection, guidance, and the preservation of trust. Every patrol, every report, and every interaction was a reflection of that responsibility. Thomas had grown into a guard who not only followed orders but also understood the meaning behind them. As the palace returned fully to its daily rhythm, Thomas felt a lasting sense of achievement. The leak had tested him and his colleagues, but it had also revealed the strength, professionalism, and resilience of everyone involved. The palace was intact, its systems improved, and its staff more vigilant and united than ever. Thomas knew that challenges would continue, but he also knew that he was prepared to face them with integrity, skill, and calm determination. In the quiet of the evening, Thomas walked the corridors one last time before ending his shift. The portraits of monarchs from centuries past seemed to observe him with approval, as if acknowledging his growth and commitment. The palace was not just a building, it was a living symbol of history, responsibility, and trust. And Thomas understood that his role in that story was not defined by a single event or mistake, but by his consistent dedication, integrity, and courage over time. With a final glance at the moonlit corridors, Thomas returned to his quarters, feeling a sense of closure and fulfillment. The incident, which had once seemed overwhelming, was now a part of his journey, a reminder of the importance of vigilance, honesty, and resilience. He knew that he had learned lessons that would guide him for the rest of his career. The palace, its history, and its people had become not only his responsibility but also his teacher, shaping him into a guard who could meet any challenge with confidence, awareness, and integrity. And as Thomas drifted into sleep, the quiet palace seemed to breathe alongside him, calm once more, yet alive with the promise of vigilance, trust, and continued dedication. He had faced uncertainty, embraced responsibility, and emerged stronger, ready to continue his service with pride, patience, and unwavering commitment.